Hi, welcome my channel. This is the story of Elena, betrayed by her own family. But she rose, fought back with truth, and took it all back. Don't miss it. Elena Reyes had worked her way through every rung of the corporate ladder at Zenexa Innovations, the San Francisco-based cybersecurity firm where she now held the title of Director of Global Operations. A decade of grit, countless sleepless nights, and sacrifices that cost her relationships and rest had finally paid off. Her role was demanding but fulfilling. She was at the helm of Zenexa's most ambitious project yet, a revolutionary AI-driven security platform. Everything was on track, until her cousin, Sabrina Kim, walked through the glass doors of Zenexa with her designer bag and picture-perfect resume. Sabrina, the family darling, had always been Elena's opposite. Where Elena was logical and reserved, Sabrina was effortlessly charming, always knowing how to light up a room and deflect suspicion. As children, their differences had caused nothing more than casual rivalry. But now, the stakes were different, much higher. Sabrina had been hired as head of talent acquisition, a senior HR position that gave her access to employee files, internal reports, and, critically, direct lines of communication with Zenexa's executives. Elena told herself to keep things professional. Family or not, she would treat Sabrina like any colleague. But from day one, something felt off. She was left off key email threads. Meetings she was supposed to lead were suddenly rescheduled without notice. Feedback she gave to the leadership team somehow never made it into final summaries. When she tried to confront it, Sabrina would flash her signature smile and say, "You've been so busy, cousin, I figured I'd lighten your load." During a Sunday call, Elena's mother gushed over the news. "Isn't it wonderful? You two, working together again, like when you were little girls." Elena smiled politely, but her stomach turned. They weren't little girls anymore. And this wasn't about sharing toys. It was about power, positioning, and something deeper. That sixth sense of unease, the one she'd sharpened through years of managing high-risk operations, buzzed in the back of her mind. Something wasn't right. Sabrina wasn't here to reconnect. She was here for something else. Elena just didn't know what yet. But she intended to find out. Because if there was one thing she had learned in corporate warfare, it was this: threats didn't always come from competitors. Sometimes, they came wearing a familiar smile. At first, Elena tried to chalk it up to coincidence. A missed meeting invite here. A project file that didn't get forwarded there. Small oversights in a fast-moving company weren't unusual. But as the weeks passed, the incidents began to pile up, and patterns emerged that were too precise to ignore. Her name was absent from high-level updates she was supposed to lead. Junior employees started bypassing her, sending their reports directly to Sabrina. One engineer even apologized, saying, "HR told us to streamline the chain of command." HR, Sabrina. The phrase echoed ominously. Elena stayed composed, taking mental notes and quietly logging every irregularity in a private folder. She didn't have the luxury of reacting emotionally. Not in this world. Not when her credibility was the first thing they'd try to chip away at. In team meetings, Sabrina's casual comments always came laced with double meanings. "Elena's got a lot on her plate lately," she'd say with faux concern. "We all just want to support her through whatever she's going through." It sounded helpful on the surface. But underneath, it was a whisper of instability, a quiet question of whether Elena was losing her grip. Even in the break room, colleagues began acting differently. Conversations hushed when she entered. A few avoided eye contact altogether. Despite it all, Elena kept pushing forward. Zenexa's flagship AI project, Sentinel, was on a tight development schedule, and she was determined to keep it on track. Her team was solid. Her milestones were being met, and key investors were watching. She didn't have time for drama. But distractions became disruption. When she sent a carefully prepared report to the board summarizing the quarter's progress, she was blindsided to learn that the version they received had been altered, delays exaggerated, budget concerns inflated. She checked the metadata. It had been edited from someone within the HR department. Still, Elena didn't accuse Sabrina. Not yet. That would only feed into whatever narrative was being built around her. Instead, she doubled down. More backups, more documentation, more silence. She knew she was being boxed in slowly. Deliberately. But what Sabrina didn't know was that Elena wasn't just a survivor. She was a strategist. And she wasn't going to fight fire with fire. She was going to wait for the exact moment the match was struck, and blow the whole thing wide open. Elena barely had time to breathe between strategy calls and code reviews when she was summoned to CEO Jasper Lin's office. His tone was neutral, but the undercurrent was clear. This wasn't a casual check-in. As she entered the sleek, glass-walled room overlooking downtown San Francisco, Jasper gestured for her to sit. Sliding a slim folder across the table without a word, Elena opened it and felt the color drain from her face. Inside were HR reports detailing supposed morale issues on her team. Allegations of erratic leadership, missed deadlines, and, most damning of all, an implication that she'd used personal leverage with investors to secure funding for the Sentinel project. The reports bore Sabrina Kim's name and Xenex's official HR letterhead. It was a meticulously crafted professional hit. I don't understand, Elena said, forcing her voice to remain calm. These claims are false. My team is meeting every milestone. Investor relations are stable. We've even finished 2 key modules ahead of schedule. She pulled up her dashboard on her tablet, showing real-time metrics, but Jasper didn't look convinced. That's not what HR's internal assessments reflect, he said. The board is concerned about the inconsistency between your updates and what they're hearing through other channels. And frankly, the whisper network is growing louder. Elena's pulse quickened. She could feel the trap tightening. So let me get this straight, she said, eyes locked on his. You're telling me that anonymous rumors and a single department's report, filed by someone with a known personal connection to me, carry more weight than actual performance data? Jasper didn't flinch. I'm saying that perception becomes reality in this business. Elena, the board meets next week. And they'll want explanations. Clean ones. I suggest you bring airtight documentation to defend your position. Otherwise, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. As she left his office, a sick, hollow ache settled in her chest. The office felt colder, narrower, as if the walls themselves had turned against her. But she wasn't defeated, only awakened. If Sabrina thought she could gaslight her out of her career, she'd clearly forgotten who she was dealing with. Elena returned to her desk, opened her secure storage, and began compiling every version of her reports. Every approval timestamp, every employee feedback thread she'd saved over the past 6 months. She had a record of everything. Receipts. That's what her grandfather always called them. In business, he'd said, your instincts are sharp, but your backups are sharper. That night, as the office emptied out and lights dimmed across Xenexa, Elena stayed behind, bathed in the glow of her screen. If Sabrina wanted a war, she'd get one, but it wouldn't be a screaming match. No, Elena would let the data do the talking. And when it did, the silence would be deafening. Elena worked through the night like a forensic scientist combing a digital crime scene. Every keystroke was deliberate. Every file she opened another piece of a puzzle that was beginning to form a much darker picture. She cross-referenced team reports, version histories, access logs, painstakingly aligning what she knew to be true against what had been twisted in the official records. Her instincts had been right. Entire sections of her quarterly reports had been rewritten after submission. Status updates had been replaced with inflated timelines. And Slack threads had gone missing. The edits were clean, but not invisible. Someone with admin-level clearance had tampered with the data. And only a handful of people had that level of access. As she traced deeper into Xenex's secure internal systems, a red flag caught her eye, an unusual server login using elevated credentials belonging to the company's former chief technology officer, who had left months ago. Elena's stomach dropped. Those credentials should have been deactivated upon his departure. Someone had reactivated them, and worse, they were being used right now. She initiated a live trace and her heart pounded as the location pinged back, inside the building. More specifically, the IP was tied to a device in the Human Resources Suite, Sabrina's office. Elena tapped into the security system and pulled up the camera feeds. There, alone under the sterile fluorescent lights at nearly midnight, sat Sabrina, her perfectly styled hair slightly undone. Her expression focused as she transferred massive amounts of data to an external drive. On her screen, Internal files from the Sentinel project, Elena's AI system. Proprietary code. Confidential development notes. Encryption modules. Sabrina wasn't just sabotaging Elena's reputation, she was stealing their intellectual property. Elena stared in stunned silence. Realization crashing over her like cold water. Sabrina had never been there to work together or rekindle family ties. She had embedded herself like a mole, gained trust, gathered intel, and now she was walking out the front door with months of classified development work. Elena's screen recorded the footage, timestamped the access logs, and made encrypted backups on her private drive. The betrayal was no longer personal, it was criminal. She leaned back in her chair, heart racing but hands steady. This wasn't just sabotage, it was corporate espionage, and now, she had proof. Sabrina had underestimated her, thinking charm would win over competence. But Elena had just turned the tables, and the clock had started ticking. 2 days later, Elena's worst fears were confirmed, only much sooner than expected. As she sipped her morning coffee and scrolled through industry news, her breath caught at the headline blazing across her screen. Civix Corp unveils revolutionary AI security platform set to launch this quarter. Her hands froze. The article boasted technology eerily similar to Xenex's top-secret Sentinel project, including unique features that hadn't even been made public yet. But it wasn't just the product that sent a chill down her spine, it was the photo. Standing next to Civix's CEO, smiling like she owned the world, was Sabrina Kim, introduced as their new director of strategic partnerships. Elena's cup hit the desk with a sharp clatter. The theft was no longer speculation, it was on the front page. Sentinel hadn't just been copied. It had been sold, and Sabrina had traded in family loyalty and corporate ethics for a title and a press release. The timeline lined up with horrifying clarity: the false reports, the tampered dashboards, the whispers about her credibility. It had all been part of a carefully orchestrated smear campaign to weaken her position while Sabrina siphoned sensitive data and built trust with Civix in the background. Fury warred with disbelief as Elena reread the article. Features Civix claimed to have developed independently, matched Xenex's internal architecture line for line. There was no coincidence, only theft. Sabrina hadn't just undermined Elena's leadership, she'd attempted to erase her legacy. And if Civix launched first, Xenexa would be ruined, not just reputationally, but legally and financially. Sentinel was the company's flagship, their market differentiator, and someone Elena had once called family had tried to burn it all down. But Sabrina had miscalculated one crucial factor: Elena had caught her in the act. And she wasn't done digging. With every second ticking toward Civix's product launch, Elena knew she had to act fast. What she needed now wasn't just proof of technical theft, but something deeper. Something that could tie Sabrina to a pattern. Not a one-time betrayal. That's when she remembered it, an old email her grandfather had sent years ago. Titled simply, "Just in case." At the time, she'd thought it was sentimental, a final goodbye after his passing. But now, her fingers trembled as she searched her archived inbox, her pulse echoing in her ears. If there was one person who'd never been fooled by Sabrina's mask, it was her grandfather. And if he'd left her something, anything, it might be the key to blowing the entire conspiracy wide open. Elena found the email buried deep in her archived inbox. Its subject line simple but haunting: "Just in case." Sent the day after her grandfather's funeral. It had sat unopened for years, a relic of grief she hadn't been ready to face. Now, with her world on the verge of collapse and Sabrina's betrayal laid bare, she opened it with trembling hands. The message began with his familiar voice, tender and wise: "My little dragon. If you're reading this, I'm gone. But there's something you need to know about your cousin Sabrina. She's not who the family thinks she is." Elena's eyes scanned each line, heart pounding as her grandfather revealed a secret he had carried alone, a decade earlier. Sabrina had approached him for a startup investment, pitching a revolutionary lifestyle platform. Trusting her, he gave her nearly $1.8 million from his private tech fund. But there was no startup, no platform. The money vanished into offshore accounts. When he confronted her, she denied everything, and then threatened to tell the family he was losing his memory. playing on their growing concerns about his age. He hadn't spoken out, fearing it would tear the family apart. But he hadn't stayed silent either. He'd documented everything: bank transfers, false company registrations, even copies of the threatening messages she sent. She's clever, he warned in the email. Always staying just on the edge of legal. But one day she'll push too far. And when she does, you'll need this. At the bottom of the email were detailed instructions for accessing a private encrypted server he had set up under the username Dragon. A nickname only she knew. The password. Remember 1969, the year he'd written his first line of code. Elena followed the instructions and accessed the server. Inside was a goldmine: PDF statements, audio recordings, even metadata logs of other companies Sabrina had worked with and quietly sold secrets from. Elena sat back, overwhelmed. Her grandfather hadn't just seen Sabrina's true nature, he'd predicted her downfall and entrusted Elena to be the one to end it. And now, with Civex's launch imminent and the board meeting days away, Elena had more than revenge. She had truth. She had proof. And for the first time in weeks, she had something even more powerful: leverage. The boardroom was already half full when Elena arrived. Dressed in a sleek navy suit that mirrored her composure, sharp, precise, and battle-ready. She had barely slept, but adrenaline sharpened her focus. At the far end of the room, Sabrina Kim stood confidently, mingling with board members, her polished charm in full effect. When their eyes met, Sabrina offered a sugary smile, as if the last month hadn't been a slow-burn attempt to ruin Elena's career. "Cousin," she said, loud enough for the room to hear. "I was just explaining to the board about the delays with Sentinel." Such a shame. Elena didn't respond with words. Instead, she calmly walked to the presentation console and connected her laptop to the screen at the head of the table. "Before we proceed with project updates," she said clearly, "I'd like to present some findings of my own." The room quieted. CEO Jasper Lin entered just as the first slide appeared: server access logs, unauthorized activity. What followed was a meticulously crafted presentation, a digital autopsy of everything Sabrina had done. Elena walked the board through timestamps, IP addresses, keycard entry logs, and screen captures of Sabrina accessing and transferring Sentinel's proprietary data. Sabrina's confident facade began to slip. "This is a smear campaign," she snapped. "She's just trying to cover for her own failures." Elena didn't flinch. "Like you covered your tracks when you stole $1.8 million from our grandfather?" she said calmly. The room went still. "I have the documentation," Elena continued, switching slides to show encrypted files from her grandfather's private server. Bank transfers, shell companies, threatening emails. "He trusted me with the truth, and he kept records." Sabrina turned pale, her voice rising. "You don't understand, I had debts. I was going to fix it." "You tried to fix it," Elena said, "by sabotaging my reputation and stealing from this company. From every person in this room." Before anyone could respond, a new voice spoke from the doorway. Harper Stone, the chief legal officer from Civex Corp., stepped in. "Miss Reyes contacted us last night. After reviewing the evidence, we've terminated our relationship with Ms. Kim and are fully cooperating with Zenexa in the investigation. We've also issued a cease and desist on our upcoming product launch." Sabrina froze, caught between rage and panic. "You can't prove," she began, lunging toward Elena's laptop, but security was already moving. Elena stepped back, arms folded. "Everything's backed up. Grandpa made sure of it." As Sabrina was escorted out, still shouting about betrayal, the board sat in stunned silence. Elena turned to Jasper. "Now, if you're ready, I'd like to talk about the real status of Sentinel." The room erupted in applause. The war was over. Elena had won, with evidence, not emotion, and the truth, at last, had spoken louder than lies. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. Within hours of the board meeting, Zenexa's legal team launched a formal investigation, and Sabrina Kim was officially terminated from her position. News of the internal scandal spread quickly through the industry, especially after Civex Corp issued a public statement confirming Sabrina's dismissal and their cooperation with authorities. What had started as whispered rumors in office corridors was now a full-scale exposure of deceit, theft, and betrayal. Other companies began to come forward. 2 former employers submitted statements detailing eerily similar incidents. All linked back to Sabrina's tenure with them. Her web of manipulation had finally unraveled. Sabrina's polished image shattered overnight. The same headlines that once praised her as a rising star now labeled her a corporate saboteur. Multiple charges followed: corporate espionage, fraud, breach of contract, and unauthorized data transfer. The once beloved cousin, the family favorite, now stood at the center of a multi-company legal firestorm. Her father, Eric Kim, refused to believe it at first, blaming jealousy and misunderstandings, but the evidence was irrefutable. Back at Zenexa, the board moved quickly to repair the damage. CEO Jasper Lin summoned Elena to his office with a rare smile. "The board is unanimous," he said, effective immediately. "We're promoting you to Chief Strategy Officer, with full oversight of Sentinel and a seat on the executive leadership team." For the first time in weeks, Elena exhaled. The cloud had lifted. The truth had not only cleared her name, it had elevated her. As she stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, watching the city stretch out before her, she didn't feel triumphant. She felt steady, calm, resolved. Sabrina's world had collapsed. But Elena's? It was just beginning to rise. In the weeks that followed, Elena stepped fully into her new role as Chief Strategy Officer. Not with fanfare, but with quiet determination. Her first order of business was stabilizing the Sentinel project and reassuring both clients and investors that Zenexa's vision remained intact, and stronger than ever. With Sabrina gone, the internal tension lifted like a veil, and her team flourished under her leadership. The launch, once threatened by sabotage, was now ahead of schedule. Media outlets that had once speculated about her decline now hailed her as the architect of Zenexa's comeback. Outside of work, the ripples of betrayal continued to spread through her family. Her mother, once Sabrina's most vocal supporter, called Elena in tears. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I spent so many years comparing you to someone I didn't really know. I should have seen you for who you are." Elena forgave her, but she didn't forget. Trust, once cracked, doesn't always return whole. Meanwhile, Sabrina's trial date was set. More companies filed claims. The cousin who once floated effortlessly through every room was now shackled by consequences long overdue. And yet, Elena didn't dwell on the wreckage. She focused forward. She moved her grandfather's framed message into her new office: "True success isn't about winning. It's about winning the right way." Those words grounded her, reminded her why she fought back, not just to protect her name, but to honor the values he instilled in her. At a company town hall, Elena spoke for the first time in her new role. "We've been through a storm," she said, "but storms don't break strong foundations, they reveal them." And as the applause echoed through the room, Elena finally felt it, not just vindication, but something deeper. She had risen, and this time, it was on her own terms. 6 months later, Elena Reyes stood in her sunlit corner office, the skyline of San Francisco stretching wide beyond the glass. The Sentinel AI platform had officially launched 2 weeks earlier, surpassing all projections and receiving critical acclaim for its innovation and security precision. Zenexa was no longer just a rising tech firm, it was now a confirmed industry leader. And Elena had become its beating heart. The whirlwind of legal battles, board meetings, and media storms had finally quieted, replaced by a steady rhythm of growth, trust, and purpose. On her desk, next to a sleek wireless keyboard, sat a small photo frame. Inside was a faded picture of her as a young girl sitting beside her grandfather, both staring at an old computer he had rigged together with salvaged parts. She was wide-eyed, reaching for the keyboard. He was smiling, proud, patient, hopeful. Below it, another frame held his handwritten message. Now her mantra: "True success isn't about winning. It's about winning the right way." Sabrina, now serving time in federal prison, still wrote from time to time. The letters came in waves, apologies laced with denial, pleas for forgiveness tangled with bitterness. Elena never replied. There were some fractures too deep to mend, some betrayals too deliberate to be undone. What Sabrina never understood was that success built on deception always collapses. Eventually, Elena didn't need revenge, she had something far more powerful: legacy. Her family was slowly beginning to see her in a new light. Her mother had become her quiet supporter, no longer comparing her to Sabrina, but asking about her work, her team, her ideas. At their first family dinner since the scandal, Elena brought a bottle of wine and found herself at the center of the table, not as the outsider, but as the anchor. Her grandfather had always seen her potential. Now, finally, others did too. But for Elena, the legacy wasn't just about restoring her name or honoring her grandfather, it was about building forward. She spearheaded a company initiative to mentor young women in tech, especially those who came from underrepresented communities. She named the program Project Dragon, a tribute to the nickname her grandfather had given her, and a symbol of quiet strength and fire. Late one evening, after her team had gone home and the city had dimmed to a calm glow, Elena stood at the window with a cup of tea. She wasn't the girl who had once been overlooked at family gatherings. She wasn't the woman quietly taking hits in boardrooms, either. She had faced the storm, gathered the truth, and rebuilt from the ashes, stronger, smarter, and wholly herself. And as she looked down at the busy street below, filled with people chasing dreams and carrying burdens of their own, she whispered a promise into the glass: I'll keep building. And I'll keep doing it the right way. Because success, she now knew, wasn't about surviving the fall. It was about rising with integrity and leaving something behind that mattered. The story of Elena Reyes teaches us that true success is not measured by titles, charm, or family approval, but by integrity, resilience, and the courage to stand for what's right. Betrayed by someone she once trusted, Elena chose not revenge, but truth. She proved that preparation, honesty, and staying grounded in your values can outlast even the most calculated lies. In the end, she didn't just reclaim her position, she redefined her legacy. Her journey reminds us that the hardest battles often reveal our greatest strength. And real success is earned when you rise the right way, not the easy way.